Dungeon Rushers is a dungeon diving game that harkens back to some of the 16-bit games, 32-bit games that you probably played in your youth. But is it worth your time? Is it worth your money? That's what we're going to answer here today on AP Games Reviews. For those of you that I knew, I just want to say thank you for joining the channel. And before we get started, I want to say thank you to Goblinz Studio for the free key for playing Dungeon Rushers. They also gave me a free key for Robothorium, which I'm going to be creating a review on as well. So check that out. And thank you for trusting me with 2 game keys. I appreciate that. This game review, for those of you that are new, I'll first of all describe the game, just give an overall setting of what it's like. 2, we'll talk about the general gameplay. So what do you actually do throughout the game? 3, we'll talk about what makes it fun, what makes it challenging, what makes it engaging. And then I'll finish up with my rating, my summary, and my overall recommendation for the game. With that, let's go ahead and get started with the game review, starting with the description. So Dungeon Rushers, like I said, it's a dungeon diving tactical RPG that in many ways it acts as a parody of the tropes and the traits that are common to RPGs, talking about character classes and orcs and dwarves and all that sort of stuff, and just kind of making fun and making light of all those different tropes that you have. There's a funny storyline that's involved, a banter between a number of the game's characters that serves to kind of call out role-playing games on a little bit of their ridiculousness. Like all good RPGs, there are skills to upgrade, gear to sift through, crafting systems that you have to master, traps to avoid as you dive through the dungeons, and of course there's plenty of turn-based combat. There's also a dungeon builder mode where you can create your own dungeons, test it, and put it out there for others to try and challenge them as well. So there's a little bit of that social aspect going on in the game. So you've got this high fantasy 16-ish bit kind of looking game. I don't know, maybe it's probably closer to like 64-bit. Anyways, it's fun, it's lighthearted, and it's a good little tactical RPG from a description standpoint. So let's go ahead and get into the gameplay. The gameplay, honestly, it's pretty simple. Most of the game takes place within the current dungeon that you're diving into. So you start on a simple overworld map with a little path going from one dungeon to the next, and allows you to select what dungeon to go into. There's also a marketplace and a crafting area that you can gear up for the said dungeon, prep up, that sort of thing. You can buy some stuff, you can buy some materials and craft them into new armor, some potions, etc. before you dive into the dungeon. Once you've picked your squad and geared up, you go into the dungeon and you explore it room by room, starting with an overhead, kind of from an overhead perspective and moving your characters around, your party around on the game board. So rooms can include traps, some of which can be disabled by using party members' abilities and energy. There's events, some of which give you loot, others give you blessings, and others can make the dungeon harder. And of course there's combat. You gotta fight the baddies. You gotta do a little bit of combat when it comes to a dungeon diving game. Combat, it takes place in a simple turn-based formula. Turn order is dictated by the character's speed. You can have a max number of 5 party members, and the enemy can have up to 6 units on the screen at one time. There are no classes in the game. Basically, every character that you have on your team has their own unique skills and attacks, which makes them quote-unquote their own class, if you will. But characters still fall into the basic RPG archetypes of tank, healer, ranged DPS, and melee DPS, with a couple exceptions. There are a couple of people that kind of blend a little bit. You got your dwarven tank, and you got your ranger, and you got your bard, and all these different people. And so combat, though, takes place on just your regular turn-based attacks. Each character is able to take one ability per their turn. So that means using a potion, using an ability, doing a basic attack, that sort of thing. 1 turn per combat. The challenges. So most of the challenges happen obviously within the dungeon. Character energy and mana, you have to manage that because you need to use it in order to use your abilities and your spells, and you have a limited amount that's available for each dungeon. You have to use it carefully. You might use that mana on traps, you could use it on abilities before you go into combat to make that combat a little bit easier, or you can use it on abilities while you're in combat. They're all the same resource, so it's kind of this push and pull of when do I use the resources in order to maximize my chances of getting through this dungeon. Obviously, you have to deal with traps. Either you have to take the damage or the effect, which can be very damaging, which can hurt a lot. Poison, I find, is one of the worst ones. Or you have to be able to disarm it somehow. So you can drain a resource, either your mana or your energy, in order to disarm the trap somehow and avoid taking that damage, taking that effect. But again, you're using up that stamina that you could use for other abilities. Combat, obviously, is a challenge, and it does have there's a little bit of RNG when it comes to the combat on how much damage that you do to enemies and how much damage enemies do to you, how much you take and deliver in combat. Characters honestly can die pretty easily. Health potions are a must, at least at the early stages of the game, and probably later into the game as well. There's not a huge supply of them, so you have to manage them pretty carefully. It's important to keep those health potions on hand. Crafting and gear management are a side challenge. There's never enough materials to make everything you need, but there's always plenty of stuff that you do need in order to be successful in these dungeons. On top of the regular challenges within combat and traps and all that sort of stuff, there's also dungeon challenges. There are plenty of optional challenges that you can try and achieve when you're in a dungeon. It might be using less than X number of potions or not triggering any traps. It could also be using your abilities only X number of times or clearing every enemy in combat throughout the dungeon. So these dungeon challenges make them a little bit harder, but they also improve the loot that you get, and they're great for achievement hunters like myself. And of course, with challenges, there's also custom dungeons, there's an arena in there, and there's also multi-level dungeons that you can conquer. These multi-level dungeons, there's 5 levels to them, and you have to clear out all 5 levels in order to, like, quote-unquote, clear the level, if you will. You take them level by level, but it's still kind of this multi-part, bigger dungeon series that you have to go through. They're kind of these landmark dungeons that kind of wrap up a nice little area or a minor story arc or something within the game. So that's the general description of the game. Now it's time for my review. For those of you that are new, here's how I do my reviews. I try and gauge my reviews based on how I would recommend this game to a friend. So if a friend were coming to me and say, I'm looking at Dungeon Rushers, what do you think about it? This is what I would tell them. So I do my rating on a scale of 1 to 5, and then a lot of description afterwards. 1 being, this game is just utterly broken, it's hopeless, don't even bother with it. 2 is a game that it's got some bugs, it's got some issues, it's not going to be a ton of fun, but maybe if you're a fan of the anime that it comes from, or a fan of, the Marvel comics and it's a Marvel game, that sort of thing, you might still be interested in it. 3 is a game that it's pretty average, it's pretty standard, nothing too special about it, but you'll probably have fun playing it. You probably won't regret your use of your money to buy in time to buy that game. 4 is, this game is excellent, it's great, it's a lot of fun. Anyone who's interested in that genre should be interested in this game and take a look at it. And a 5 is a game that just kind of breaks open the whole atmosphere of gaming and really changes it up. So this is a game like God of War from this current year, where it just like is groundbreaking, it's beautiful, it's amazing. Minecraft, in the way that it just revolutionized gaming and how big of a impact it still has. World of Warcraft back in its heyday and just how big and massive it was. These are your 5-star gamings, basically. So where do I rate Dungeon Rushers? I rate Dungeon Rushers a 2.5. It's all right. It's not great. The dialogue is cute and it's fun and it's got this nice atmosphere, and the writing is pretty clever about pointing out all these tropes of traditional fantasy worlds and RPGs, and it's kind of like poking fun at itself, and I really enjoy that. The problem is that the dialogue it's just not special enough it's not good enough to save a game that, to begin with, doesn't have a lot going for it. It's not super special. In combat, honestly, I need a lot more information. How does armor and resistance work? How are they calculated? How does this impact damage? How are rolls calculated? There's a lot of RPG stats that are in use in this game, but the game doesn't explain all of them very well. And if there are a lot of stats, I need to know exactly how they work so that I can customize my team and make sure that it operates in the way that I'm comfortable with. At this time, I just don't have a lot of that information. There seems to be a pretty steep difficulty curve once you finish the initial tutorial/starting dungeons. It ramps up pretty quickly, and the game can get grindy a bit and hard pretty quick after finishing the tutorial area, which is a concern. Grindy is fine for like a mobile game. It's fine for a game where, it's free to play and I don't have to worry about, basically I've spent a bunch of money on this game. How long is it gonna, are they padding the game time, the play time, in order to make it seem longer? And that's kind of what I see here with this game. The game slowly goes from fun to meh to repetitive throughout the various dungeons. I would also say that the game starts a little bit too slow, especially in terms of how quickly you get new characters added to your team. I would say that they should really speed up the rate at which you get new characters on your roster, so that you have more time with these characters and you get to develop them more and figure out which characters you really like on your squad. Combat honestly gets a little frustrating. especially when your team keeps missing or doing the lowest possible damage on their rolls. And again, I just don't understand what goes into these different rolls and how they're calculated. It gets a little frustrating. There's microtransactions in the game, which I'm not a fan of. The microtransactions at this time are just for skins, I think, but it's still a single player game with microtransactions, and I'm not comfortable with that. What that tells me is basically that they've potentially changed up the game design in order to accommodate additional revenue streams. I think that it turns out to be a lower quality product when you have that in the game. As good of an intention as it may be, you're still tempted to make the decision to alter gameplay and make it more grindy in order to facilitate people buying potions on their account. So I'm not happy with that. There's also the arena, which again I didn't really try just because there wasn't a whole lot there for me. It's a good try from an indie game studio and the game seems to have a decent amount of promise, but I think that they still have a good ways to go before they create like a solid RPG, tactical RPG. If I were to so I'm giving this a recommendation of a 2.5, but I'm also saying that with a caveat that this game could get better. I think the way to make this better is, one, streamline this game and make it a mobile game. Make it a cheap to free mobile game to facilitate those microtransactions. Mobile games are fine being grindy because they're free. People don't care. As long as they can earn everything in game without having to purchase stuff, then it's fine. So I would streamline this and make this a mobile game. The game doesn't seem that complex. The graphics are pretty basic. And this game would be honestly a pretty fun time killer when it comes to commuting or traveling or anything like that. There's already the overworld is already kind of this linear path of dungeons that you can go through. It's pretty grindy. These are all things that are common on mobile games. Make this a mobile game, and it would be much better. Honestly, this would be like I don't know. This would probably be like a 3.25, maybe a 3.5 when it comes to a mobile game. So make it a mobile game. That's my suggestion. As far as it goes now, if it's on sale for like $1, sure, get it for $1, maybe $3, if you're really interested. But for now, for regular gamers, I would just say don't bother with it. There are plenty of other good games out there you can spend a lot of time in, and you can enjoy without having the grindiness, the potential for microtransactions to mess up the game, that sort of thing. So that's my suggestion. If you have any questions, any concerns, leave a comment down below in the comment section, and I will be glad to answer them. I'm always happy to hear you guys' responses and hear from you guys. It means the world to me when you leave a comment. So thanks again, and we'll see you again soon here on AP Games.